Hey, what's up everybody? Tommy Kraft here, writer, director, executive producer, and cinematographer, and basically everything else on Star Trek Horizon, a Star Trek fan film I've been working on as my passion project for the past 3 years. Today, I'm going to bring you a review of the CE-1500WS LED light by Came TV. Without further ado, let's do a quick unboxing and get started. So the first thing I always have to say about these people is that at the very least, their packaging is always really solid. I ordered their 1200 watt HMI light and it was packaged just as well as this. It took me quite a while to get through all the tape and boxing, but I finally did, and I was able to start pulling out the bits and bobs. There's some really nice styrofoam in there to keep everything safe. You have all your cables on top and also the wireless remote there. To be honest, I'm not going to talk about it because I don't really find it useful because it's just an on and off feature. If it had dimming capability, that'd be really nice, but just as an on and off, I don't really find it useful. And here comes the fixture itself. It actually looks very nice and feels good in your hand, though it is quite heavy, and there's the accessories, but let's take a closer look. The housing looks very nice, looks professional. And looking in the front, you can see there's no Fresnel glass, just a solid lens. I knew this is the way it would come. They say so on their website, but apparently you can get a Fresnel. And here's the back with its various features that we'll go through. Dimmer. It even has a port to daisy chain lights. And here is the barn doors. They're actually very well constructed. They feel really solid. They seem to work pretty well. There's a tag on the front there. I don't really know what for. I do worry that eventually they'll lose their strength and might become floppy, but we'll see over time. And finally, the filters, which will be very important, especially that clear one. The orange one, not a big fan, but it might be useful. And then finally, we have our various cables. There's a classic bit of over-engineering. It has a screw-on XLR cable that goes into a regular power cable, but the screw-on doesn't actually seem to work that well. I don't know what the point is. And then here's the daisy chain cable. The cables feel nice and they work well. They don't seem to have any issues, so good job there. And then finally, a close-up of the wireless remote control with the extending antenna. And then the only other bit in the box was the manual. It's a little 2-page insert. I'm surprised it came with one. Their HMI did not, and that's a light that actually should have a manual. But it seems to be well enough made. And here we are taking the light out and getting it together for the first time. You do have to open the case and take out this foam and a plastic bag they have in there for some reason. And the case is very difficult to get open, so make sure you really put some pressure on that and push in to get it open. You can see there's some play there on the heatsink and light fixture. I don't know if that's normal, if it's just my unit, but it does kind of wobble a bit, so that's something to keep in mind. It's not a huge deal, just be extra careful with your light. And on the back here, we have the focus mechanism. You can see it's pushing the light fixture forward or pulling it backwards. It's not the greatest focus spot mechanism, but it works. It does its job well enough. And in any position, it does have the wobble. Now, one thing I will say is make sure you get a paper towel and just make sure the front of the LED itself is clean. There was some styrofoam in there that had stuck to the LED, and it probably would have either burnt or melted once I turned the light on. So keep that in mind. And here I am getting the cable plugged in for the first time. One thing I will note is you'll see the red switch up there on the left of the fixture. That is the switch to turn the fan on and off. It does not work on mine. I don't know why, but the fan is just always on. I will say, though, this is not a huge deal because the fan is really quiet. You basically have to put your ear up to it to be able to hear it. And one other thing to notice, the spot focus mechanism knob is on the bottom. At first, I was a little bit confused. I didn't know if that was a spot focus because it almost looks like a fuse port, but the fuse port is elsewhere on the back of the fixture. And so this is the deal with those filters. They just snap in and snap out via little magnets on them. They're not the strongest magnets, but they work, and you'll definitely need the filter on there. Just keep in mind that it is a little flimsy, so if you're carrying the light around, the filter could fall out. And so finally, let's go ahead and power this up for the first time without the filter. Whoa, look at that fringing. That is not pretty. So once you put the filter on, that goes away. It does cut a little bit of light, but not too much. But even with the filter, you do have this weird color thing going on the sides here, which seems to be the light reflecting inside the case and shooting off to the sides, the color of the case. It looks kind of cool for some situations maybe, but it's certainly something to watch out for and keep in mind on your shoots. But with all that said, I really wanted to see how this thing performed in terms of color temperature and brightness when compared to a couple of other lights, so let's go ahead and do that now. So I just used my white door as a neutral backdrop and put the front face of the light 4 feet away and started doing some testing using a cheap lux meter I got from Amazon. It's accurate plus or minus to I think 5 or 10%, but it's okay since we're basically using it to compare multiple lights here. Now what I did for all of these readings was pick 5 numbers and average them. You can do the same with any of the readings that you see here. I started out by going full spot with the 5600 or clear filter on the LED light. I got 454.8 at the full spot, and then on full flood I got 296.4 lux. I then went to the 3200 full flood and got 206.2. And then finally I went full spot and got 339.4. And then I went no filter at all, full spot, and got 630.6 lux. And then down to full flood with no filter and got 320. For one of my 2 comparison lights, I got my genuine Airy 650 watt tungsten Fresnel, and what you will notice is that it is significantly brighter than the LED. I'm assuming the 1500WS part of the name of the LED means that they say it's equivalent to a 1500 watt tungsten. Not the case at all. Now, of course, this is a full spot Fresnel lens, so the full spot here is automatically going to be brighter than the full spot of the LED because that doesn't have a Fresnel. While the full flood is brighter, but not this much brighter than the LED. So for this measurement, we got 1523.6, and for the full flood, we got 425.6. Now with some CTB gel, we got 612.4. This is full CTB. And with the full flood with full CTB, we're getting 166.2. And for my final test light, I got my 1x1 light panel. That's a fancier studio. It's an off-brand Chinese panel that I got on Amazon years ago from a green screen setup, which you can see more of here. But I only did one measurement here because there is no flood or spot mechanism. And it is 314.6 lux. So now let's compare them all on the table. So the first thing to note was the X10 in the bottom on the previous measurements. The lux meter measures in increments of 100 times 10. So these are the actual numbers. And also I will say this isn't strictly speaking scientific because the numbers do vary based on where exactly you put the meter. So I tried to always get the brightest measurements I could and then average them. I took 5 numbers, 5 measurements, and added them together, divided by 5 to get the average, and this is what I came up with. The Airy is generally brighter, there's no two ways about it. The only place where it really starts to dim down is once you put a CTB gel on it, but that's to be expected. So you're basically doing the same thing with the LED light once you put the filters in. And finally, just jumping over to the 1x1 LED panel, for that color temperature and power, it's pretty close and fairly equal, except that it is much brighter than the Airy light at that color temperature. And for better or for worse, the only thing you have to keep in mind with the LED panel is that it's just going to be a big square and the light quality is going to be different, but if that works for you, then great. And so I just want to do one more comparison here between the lights and then we'll jump over to my final verdict. So this here is probably going to be your biggest issue with this light, and that's the color. It clearly has a magenta cast, as you can see here next to the color temperature blue Airy Fresnel. The Airy looks very natural and white, while the LED looks very purple, and even with the filter, it still has a purple cast at spot here and now at flood. Comparing the two lights, you can still see on the left, the LED has a bit different of a color temperature and purple cast. And now just comparing them one at a time, there's the LED, and here's the Airy tungsten. Now, I will be the first to admit that once again, this is not scientific. It'd be best to do this with a colorimeter, but colorimeters are honestly expensive and I don't have one. And so here's another test, the Airy by itself with CTB, and then the LED with its natural daylight temp, again with the magenta cast. Now, you can use a plus green gel, but it's never going to exactly match the Airy with its CTB or any other light that's daylight balanced, so that can be a little bit frustrating. And then finally here we have next to the light panel by itself, and then the two lights compared together. And then finally the Came TV LED by itself once again, and you can still see even next to that panel there's magenta. And so finally there's only one other thing to look at, and that's the power consumption, and this is where you really save compared to the Airy. We're only drawing 1.56 amps and 111 watts on the Came TV LED, and as you can see with the light panel, the numbers are fairly similar at 1.18 amps, so a little bit less, but not exactly the same output, and 82.7 watts. And other thing you'll notice here too is the difference in color temperature. And finally, now going to the Airy, this is huge, 5.56 amps at approximately 678 watts. Now this, I will point out, is to be expected for the Airy unit. This is a completely normal power reading for a 650 tungsten Fresnel that's doing what it's supposed to. The thing that you have to decide is if the savings in power consumption on your LEDs is worth some of the other issues, and that's the last thing I'm going to talk about briefly here before we wrap this up. Now, if you watched my review of KMTV's 1200 watt economic HMI, you will notice I talked about this short in that as well. And I used both that HMI and the LED 1500WS in this short. And so I used the HMI to punch in light rays through the windows, and I used the LED light as the backlight for the guy when he's standing directly across from the girl. So when he's going through the fridge like this right now, you don't see it. But when he comes back in front of her, it's the light I used directly behind him on camera left. And the reason why is I actually did try punching it through diffusion as the key light, and I could not get good skin tones no matter what I did, to be completely honest. The skin tones always look kind of muddied and browned and washed out, and then so I went with my Airy 650 tungsten Fresnel, put the full CTB on it. It might have actually been half CTB, I'm not completely sure at this point, but the skin tones looked wonderful that way. And so even here, I mean, of course it's been through color correction, but you can see there's a very slight magenta cast on that as his backlight. And so my final verdict is that I still like the light. It still has use. And, you know, it's up to you to decide if the issues it has are better or worse than any other LED light out there. What I really like is the ability to have a much more directional light that you don't get with a light panel. Now, that said, you may be able to get a better LED directional light that doesn't have the magenta cast, but you can get rid of enough of it if you're using it for a backlight. So final verdict, I don't really know. That tells you enough about the light, I think. You know, there are situations where it is useful and situations where it just really will not be a good choice at all. And so overall, though, I'm not unhappy with the purchase. I can still find plenty of use for it, and it looks great in my collection of lights. So there's that at least. And that is actually all I have for you. So thank you for watching this review. I hope that you found it useful in aiding your purchasing decisions. If you would like to check out my review of KMTV's HMI economic model, that is going to be up here on the screen, and also you can check out this short. Thanks again for watching, and have a good one.